in that direction.
Question number 3, the Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Did he say Budget 2011 built, quotes, a platform for faster growth, more jobs and higher incomes? And if so, did his forecasts in Budget 2012 show faster growth, more jobs and higher incomes than his Budget 2011 projections?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, in answer to the first part of the question, yes, the policy steps taken in Budget 2011 built a platform for faster growth, more jobs and higher incomes than would otherwise have occurred. In fact, each of our budgets has been focused on building a platform for faster growth, more jobs and higher incomes than would have been the case if we'd carried on with the policy settings we inherited in 2008, which were forecast to lead to permanent deficits and ever-rising debt. In relation to the second part of the question, where the member refers to his forecasts, they are of course not the Finance Minister's forecasts or projections, they are independent Treasury forecasts, and they fluctuate from year to year depending on a range of factors including the economic outlook of our trading partners.
The Honourable David Parker.
Supplementary. Did Budget 2012 cut forecast growth in real GDP per capita from 1% to just 0.8% this year, and from 3.2% to 1.8% for the next year? And if so, is cutting his own forecasts what he meant when he promised faster growth?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the answer to the second part again, I have to point out to the member that he knows that they're independent Treasury forecasts, but there you go. And part of the first part of the question, the reality is, as we know, that the actual growth that turns out depends on a number of things. Now, I know the member doesn't like to focus on what actually happens in the wider world, but during that period we had the ongoing aftershocks in Christchurch and we had lower growth in our trading partners, and they can object all they like, but that actually happens to be the reality.
Supplementary.
The Honourable David Parker.
Does Budget 2012 forecast worsening current account deficits totalling $64 billion to 2016? And if so, how is another $64 billion of overseas borrowing good for New Zealand?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, they do in fact increase, of course not to the percentages seen under the previous government when they lifted to 8-something% of GDP and caused us very significant issues which we are still rebalancing to come from. And the interesting thing, it may be, but from a much lower level, and the difference with it this time is that it is largely about investment in the New Zealand economy, whereas previously under the old Labor government they were borrowing to consume and borrowing to spend, and that was an unsustainable position. We know where that leads. It's called Southern Europe.
The Honourable David Parker.
Does he agree with the conclusion about his budget from Fran O'Sullivan in the Herald that, and I quote, "The major problem is that there is no clear economic growth agenda"?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I can safely assume that his answer to that question would be no. And the reality is, as Fran would know if she actually focused on it, is that we have a very strong economic growth agenda involved in a whole range of areas. The tax plans that we have made, the capital markets in terms of the mixed ownership model, the investment in innovation and science, the investment in tertiary education, vocational education, and getting off people into work, off benefit into work, the investment in education, Mr Speaker, the focus on primary resources and encouraging the use of our natural resources, the investment in infrastructure and the investment in trade policy and encouraging new free trade agreements with other countries. Mr Speaker, this government has a comprehensive economic growth agenda which we will continue to put in place for the benefit of this country.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
The Minister appeared to be quoting from some official laminated documents there. I wonder if he'd like to table them for us.
Let me check with the Minister. These were those official documents? They were not. Supplementary question, the Honourable David Parker.
Does he then agree with Vernon Small and Fairfax that, quotes, "the budget has been a barely qualified disaster"?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I find Mr Small a very engaging personality, but I'm unlikely, or Dr Small to you, but I'm unlikely to agree on his economic prognosis.
The Honourable David Parker.
Which is the more serious blow to his budget's credibility? commentators' views that this budget has no clear growth agenda, or the cut in his own forecast growth figures, or the incompetence shown around his government's attempts to grow the economy through larger class sizes?
The Honourable Steven Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, sometimes I really do wonder where that member lives and on which planet, because the reality is, if you look at the commentators that count, like, for example, S&P and those rating agencies, they have all endorsed the New Zealand budget of the Finance Minister and have a number of other serious economic commentators, Mr Speaker, and that member constantly tries to pretend that New Zealand is not dealing with the challenges of the Christchurch earthquake and the world economy, and as long as he keeps doing that, the country will still think he's in la-la land.
Question number 4, Katrina Shanks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister of Justice, what steps is she taking to improve access to criminal history information for New Zealand employers?
The Honourable Judith Collins.
Mr Speaker, this week I signed a memorandum